Welcome to the Altiva Software website. In this next video, Matt Tomey will be demonstrating CADconform for AutoCAD. We will be using the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers CAD Standard Workspace. Altiva Software has developed this database for your immediate use, or you can customize your own CAD standard databases. Here's Matt.
When CADconform is installed, a new item is added to the Quick Access toolbar. Here's CADconform. Clicking on CADconform opens the custom ribbon. CADconform's ribbon is broken into the following categories: main, login and logout, drafting, conforming, which is the check fix function, certification, reporting, and administration. We log into the software that pulls the license and then grants the privileges that are defined. We can use multiple databases here. So I could define different standards for either different clients or different groups. Some of the clients will have a single database of standards that's then broken up, which we'll see in a bit, into subsets. Others will have, like, this is the database specifically for this drafting group within the organization. That's all kind of entirely up to you how you want to configure that. Once I log in, there's some other fun stuff we can do in here. So we have user management, where I can define privileges as to who's allowed to do what, even lock people into specific things. The database itself, this naming here for the where we're storing the standards, we can tie that to both a profile. So if I'm working in that environment where I have multiple clients set up with different configurations tied through the profile, when I log into that database, it will automatically switch to a matching profile, or a profile matching that name, so we can have some automatic profile switching happening. We also have some back-end stuff happening where we can load a specific configuration file based on that standard that we're logging into, like custom reporting. There's a whole bunch of other kind of file naming conventions and different things like that that we can tie in through the configuration, and they can be triggered to be different based on the database of standards that you're logging into. So we can switch the AutoCAD configuration environment or your support file paths, things like that. And we can switch the CADconform configuration itself based simply off which standard the user logs into here, and that all just triggers automatically on the login. The actual standards definitions themselves. So this is our area where we select within those feature tables. I mentioned we could break up the standards in different ways. So this is within a database itself. We can then break things out into subsets again, as is the case here. The Army Corps of Engineers, they have these two common feature tables and then specific ones for each discipline, but you could obviously mix those as well as needed, depending on the type of work that's being done. For looking at the actual standards themselves, if I just open up the general one here, we just have different options available based on the type of feature that's defined. So dimensions, for example, have a lot more available options to define than, say, a line item does. We can define ranges. With the Army Corps standard, for example, they have an optional 1 or 2 character status code that is at the end of all their layer names. It is optional. So our default for all of the different items is a straight layer name, but all of them have the option to add a dash, and there's codes for like new, demo, existing, all these different types of things. They can expand essentially the layer set based on those optional status codes. Most of them have ranges on weights. Most of them have ranges on like what types of lines they're allowed to use. So the standard is more narrow than the National CAD standard, which is more like a layer naming convention, but there is still a lot of flexibility within it that, you know, you're required to use these layers and these specific criteria on those layers, but there's a bit of flexibility in there as well. And then we can also get into some more detailed stuff. We had like actual representations of the lines instead of just these little line indicators. That's another configuration trigger we can turn on and off. So there's a lot of specificity we can add here as needed. Some clients will essentially use it as a make sure you use our layering system, and that's about it. Others will get more into the nitty gritty here of text heights and widths and all those kind of things. We can import from various states. As most commonly when we're setting these things up, we use an Excel spreadsheet. You can quite easily manipulate, obviously, large sets of data in the spreadsheet and then just suck all that into the database through that format. We can also memorize the layer, line types, and various styles from basically the drawings, environmental settings from, for example, a template file, and verify those are correct. If we want to ensure that users aren't changing layer properties or modifying our text and dimension styles and things like that, that's also things we can add. As far as the specificity of the standards go, obviously you could come in here and create individual items and define them that way, but importing from a drawing or a spreadsheet or something like that's going to make life much faster. So let's kick off. I'm going to run a report on this drawing just to see what kind of state it's in now. I'm going to overwrite that one. I would need to define, if I was using branding, I could tell it to recognize the branding mark. If I don't have branding turned on, I would need to specify what standards I'm actually going to check this drawing against, or drawings. I would come in here then and choose which drawing or drawings I want to run a report across. I can tell it to also go and look at any external references that are associated with that drawing. So grab the XREF and check it as well. And then basically just run a report across there. It's going to scan the file and generate this little report here for me. So we have list of drawings I checked down the side here, list of the actual layouts and models in the middle, and then various error count information at the bottom here. So I've got some global settings, some environmental stuff going on in the drawing. I've got a bunch of errors in the model itself. We can export those to Excel spreadsheet and HTML for more of a kind of doc control or overall view of the current project. Obviously, the power is more in giving the drafters the ability to both follow a standard from the outset and then also verify their own work is following the standard before they send it back in or are done with it.
This is the drafting interface.
You can see that every time I choose one of the tools, it's asking me what standards I want to work with. This is where the branding comes in handy. If I hand this off to somebody else, I don't want them to have to know in advance which standards I was using on this drawing. So I'm just going to save those to the DWG file itself. And then I get this tool palette that is generated directly from the standards that I defined in the database here. So if we look within the general, under the general information, I come back here and compare that to the general standards we were looking at there before. You can see that these are laid out exactly the same. So under general is general information. You can see that. So the way we're defining it in the standards is the way that it's going to be presented to the drafter at the end of the day. For the drafter, they're simply choosing items off the list here. If the ranges are enabled and allowed, they'll get little drop downs and this extra little toolbox, additional layers there defined at the moment. We can expand on all of those properties, even to the point of I might decide this is supposed to have G-ano text. Let me copy that. And I'm going to create a new one. Demo. And then if I come back in and start drafting now, I've got two options available because we saw before in that definition of the standards that those status codes were allowed. So a lot of this stuff is very interactive with the items already in the drawing. Obviously, my line types, we still need our template file. I need my line types to be in there to make them accessible. And we're interacting with the block libraries in the background. But once we define things within the database itself, plug things into the standard, the next time I open up this tool palette, it's going to have all those changes automatically in there. Hitting options on this tool palette is going to be defining for me like match lines, it's automatically updating the symbology that's defined and kicking me into a default drafting command. So I am simply drafting away based on the standards that are defined. I'm not looking up any codes or anything. It's just jumping through the tools, grabbing items, and CADconform's doing the rest of the work for me. We've got some other advanced stuff in here as well. So we can define scaling to automatically scale items based on annotation scale or a user-defined scale. We've got a favorites tool palette option. So if I'm doing a lot of drafting in here, I could start adding things to my favorites palette and save me having to jump around through the menus so much. Generate my own little quick tool. I've also got my history, so the last things that I've used, keeps track of those. And we also have a search option where I can use either typing in information or I can base things on object types. So just show me lines and then just show me lines with text, with call in the word or CA in the name, things like that. So the idea being, especially for new drafters or drafters unfamiliar with the standard that they're currently working in, speed things up, give them quick access to the tools, enable them to draft directly from the standards from the outset. We're trying to be like passive enforcement here. So if you have tool palettes for drafting already set up and they generate data based on the standard, it's still going to pass the check. If I had data in the file that I know already matches the standards and I copy it and move it around, that is still going to pass the check because it is compliant to the CAD standards. How I would find out if something is not compliant in the interactive fashion is using my little check and fix tool up here. Start the process. As we saw, the first thing it checks is those global environmental file settings. So here's all the line types that were wrong. I'm just going to go ahead and hit yes. I want to fix all those. Got some layer definitions that are incorrect. So color was defined with the wrong properties, wrong description. Hit yes. And then it's going to skip into scanning through the actual objects in the files. I want to hide everything else. I can manually zoom or I can hit the zoom out button to get to the extents of that. Turn it all back on again, get a bit of a feel for what I'm looking for. There is a sorting mechanism in here where it matches color and line type, layer, all those kind of things to sort the most likely candidates at the top of the list. Things like lines when you're working entirely in by layer. Down the very bottom here, once I make a selection, it tells me here's what needs to be changed to those items in order for them to comply with the CAD standards. So go ahead and do a single change on that one that was in here flashing at me, or I can just say change all and fix all 114. So skipping on, same process. Doesn't really matter what we're working with, if it's text, lines, all that. It's going to highlight something for me. It's going to give me information about what it found at the top and available options in the middle. There's still obviously incentive on the user to identify what that is supposed to represent. So we're currently on a layer contour minor. I'm going to hide again and zoom out a bit and get a bit of a feel for what that's supposed to be. And then say, you know what? Yes, I agree. That is a contour. Start typing that in, find the appropriate item, verify what's going to change, and then change all and kind of move on. We've got some undo and undo all buttons. So if I recognize at this point, oh, that was supposed to be a major contour, I could undo and step back. Or I could hit next and kind of carry on through the thing. So topo boundary exterior lines. These are obviously fences around those buildings. So onus on me as the drafter to identify what the item is and choose the appropriate items and move on. We do have some interesting other kind of side effect benefits based on how you define the standards. So in this case, it's found a line on this C alignment symbology. I know based on my knowledge of the standard that layer has been reserved for blocks and only blocks. And if I have a bit of a poke around the file, I can see, well, there's actually a block here. And this is a block that has somehow been exploded. So we can't kind of automatically put that back together again, but it does at least highlight that error for me so that I can kind of manually fix that myself without ending up with a bunch of kind of exploded data laying around the file. I know that's fixed, so I'm just going to hit ignore. There's also an ignore all option, which skips all instances. I could also, since we've kind of been manually editing here, hit the start process again, and it'll just kind of take over from the next step. So now we've actually found a block that doesn't match the block definition. It's another one off in space here. Again, similar kind of process. So the one difference in this case is obviously identifying where the block comes from. It's telling me the block location is different. All this is really giving me is the library. We can define libraries or individual block files as part of the standard. For the Army Corps, it's just simplifying things by having, instead of having hundreds of block DWG files, you've got one for each library itself. Gonna go ahead and do a change all there. I've got some ranges allowed. I'm just going to leave those as the defaults. And then in here, I would need to find that. So I can search for horizontal and vertical. So it's that guy. I can go ahead and hit OK. And we can see they got bigger. So obviously there's a scale going on here that I don't want to mess with. So I'm going to undo that change. I'm going to go back in here again, change all again. And I can see it's actually 0.2. I know just from messing around with here, I think it's actually 0.1. Let's see, uniform scale on that. And okay. There we go. That looks better. So undo commands, all that kind of stuff, functionality still there. And then similar process here again. We got another block, manhole, something. That's going to be utilities. Change all on that. And as we saw on the slides, I've got that search functionality in here, so I can step through these and figure out which one I want that to be. I'm just going to say it's that. We already know there's a scale being applied here, so I'm going to add that back in. And bam. So I've now stepped through this drawing, fixed the number of items. It does give me a summary at the end. Obviously, I reset that when I re-hit the start button. Go ahead and hit start again now. We've got 0 errors now, so. But it will keep track of what you did. Did you delete anything? Did you? There's a delete option under the tools menu. And as you saw as well with the broken block there, there's things that I can always do to interact directly with the file. You know, if I knew this just wasn't supposed to be here, I could select it and delete it. CADconform, as long as I did something that was valid per the CAD standards, is going to be fine with it. Final step of the process here, if that functionality is something that you're going to be using or is required, is watermarking this drawing. We have a little placeholder block down here. The watermark itself is something that's defined and is basically coming from a block file and is just an actual block to begin with in there. I could just hit the add watermark button. It's going to scan through, verify that all my entities are 100% and all of those settings, because I've defined my layer properties and styles, wants to make sure they're all correct as well. And then provided they are, it updates that little marker with the watermark. Obviously, this can be represented however we want. It is just a block file to begin with. Some clients will have kind of similar to this, where it's like, there's no logo in the border sheet until you place the watermark. Kansas has like a little bit of line of text down in the bottom corner here that just says watermark this file, and then that updates with the date stamp and the standards used when you actually apply the watermark. And we can do that because there's information in the background here. If I query this watermark, we have all this information in here about what stamp was used, who stamped it and when, the machine name, what standards were used and the versions of those standards. We're versioning our standards as we update them. And then the overall status of the watermark itself. And then any change that I make to the drawing at that point puts that little red line through and basically invalidates the watermark. So if I query the watermark now, it's saying, hey, your file's been modified. So something happened. I can ask it to verify the status, and it's going to scan through and tell me it was modified after the last certification on this date. So when I invalidated it, all that kind of information as well. I could also come back in here and try and add the watermark again. And because what I added was valid, it's perfectly happy with it. No problems at all. Just updates the stamp. If I remove things, also invalidates the watermark. This is basically doing double duty. So it's verification for the owner of the drawing that the standards have been followed throughout the process. There's also some verification from the drafter's perspective that when I was finished with this drawing, I put the stamp on it. You can see that my stamp was there, and if it was changed down the track, somebody else needs to take ownership of those changes that were made. One last thing I'll show real quick. So in this batch process for the reporting, we do have some batch conversion options as well, where if we have a set of known data, we can automatically map things back and forth. So I know that in-house, we always draft general notes on a layer called general notes. And for this client, they use G-NO-note. We can set up certain things like that to automatically kind of remap data from one known entity to another known entity. Obviously, your standard garbage in, garbage out rules apply when you're working on batch conversion of data, but things we can do to show you as one of the output reports that we got some naming convention information in there, but also this custom commands info. These can be either .NET, so we do write and compile DLL files that can be loaded in for those checks, or a list file. We generally lean on the .NET because it's more robust, but as long as it's something relatively simple you're doing. So in this case, it's basically just saying, all right, if there's a check first if it's a reference file. So if the drawing title starts with XR, that was their naming convention for XREFs. So if the file starts with XR in the drawing title, just ignore it. It passes, and it gets a little. The output here has a little line in it saying this is a reference file. If it's not, then go ahead and grab the number of layouts in the list. And if that number of layouts exceeds 1, then it fails. They basically just want to verify that there's only one layout down here. Their drawing structure was we have our model space, we have our sheet space, and we only want one sheet in any DWG file. So this would fail based on there's 2 layouts found. We've written a variety of different checks, obviously purging. We've got written things before where it looks for specific lines in the title block and verifies, is that a valid drawing number? We've had ones where, the drawing number should match a segment of the file name, all these different things that folks come up with as part of their kind of more global settings. Are there any references missing? Did you attach the references with an absolute path instead of a relative path? Obviously, lots more kind of naming convention-y stuff, and even down to, is it using the correct CTB file in the plotting or things to that effect? Are the viewports on the right layer? All these kind of things that are far too specific to a particular data source or a data set. Like that client's requirements are so specific that trying to add that kind of thing directly to the CADconform checking software would be, burdensome and inappropriate for everybody else using it. But those kind of specific checks can be covered with this expansion into the custom commands. So if it can kick back either a string or a pass fail kind of type output, and you've got some folks in-house that can write Lisp, or we're always happy to help with that stuff. We can expand the things you can do to verify things in the files. This company in particular, basically, it's that global stuff is what they care about. all of these things that they were dealing with for their document management system. So yeah, and then obviously those can change based on, I mentioned at the start, this data source can define the configuration. So that configuration can then be pulled. So if you had Group A uses this naming convention and has these specific checks, and Group B has a different naming convention and those specific checks, that stuff can all be triggered just based on changing the standard that you log into at the very beginning.
If you would like more information on CADconform or any of Altiva's solutions, please contact me, Marie Franklin. Thank you.